I am Adelaide Vance. I am 36 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated my hard-earned success as a temporary holding account for my brother. Last Tuesday, my mother stood in my home office and told me to pack my bags. She said I needed to move into a downtown studio by the end of the month. My brother Preston stood beside her, dropping a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes onto my Persian rug with a hollow thud. His new wife Valerie tapped her manicured fingernails against her leather handbag, sighing like I was wasting her time. Preston told me he was starting a real family and they needed the space. My $800,000 estate was apparently his birthright. They expected me to cry. They expected me to nod and yield the way I had done since childhood. But what they did not know was that I had spent the last decade building defense technology for the government. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly reached under the heavy oak edge of my desk and pressed a silent biometric sensor. 90 seconds later, the door swung open and two armed security contractors stepped into the room to physically remove my blood relatives from my property. Before I explain the look on my mother's face when a federal-grade security guard escorted her down my driveway, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Vengeance. If a story about a quiet daughter enforcing ironclad boundaries speaks to you, drop a comment below. Tell me your age, where you are watching from, and what time it is there. Now let me take you back to the exact moment those moving boxes hit my floor. The afternoon sun slanted through the bullet-resistant glass of my office windows, casting sharp shadows across the mahogany paneling. We live in Pennsylvania, a state built on generational wealth, iron fortunes, and unyielding borders. My family respects wealth, but they only respect it when it belongs to a man. To my left, resting near my monitor, sat a heavy bronze replica of the Liberty Bell. It was a gift from a military contractor I work with, a silent nod to sovereign independence. "Pack you things, Adelaide," my mother Cynthia said. Her voice carried the same brisk flat tone she used to order waitstaff around at her country club. "You are rattling around in this huge place all by yourself. Preston and Valerie are nesting. They need the square footage for the nursery." I sat back in my leather chair. My gaze shifted from my mother to Preston. At 34, he still carried the smug, relaxed posture of a boy who had never faced a single consequence. He failed out of 3 startups, and my father bailed him out every time. "It just makes logistical sense," Addie Preston said. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I already called a contractor to tear out that kitchen. Valerie wants a double island before the baby comes. You can take the guest room at Mom and Dad's until you secure a lease downtown." The air in the room felt thin. They had used an old emergency spare key to let themselves in, bypassing the front gate while I was on a conference call. They walked into my private sanctuary and began divvying up my life like estate liquidators. Valerie checked her phone, ignoring me entirely. "You want me to hand over the deed to my estate?" I said. My voice stayed low, steady, and measured. "Don't be selfish," my mother snapped. She adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat. "Your career is nice, but it is not a legacy. Preston is giving us a grandchild. Family is a legacy. You should be happy to help him step up." I looked at the cardboard boxes on the floor. I looked at the brother who thought my life was a placeholder for his own. I let the silence stretch until Valerie stopped tapping her nails and shifted uncomfortably in the quiet room. The silence in my office stretched into a palpable, suffocating weight. Valerie shifted from one designer heel to the other, the crisp leather of her handbag creaking under her restless, impatient grip. I kept my gaze fixed on the heavy bronze replica of the Liberty Bell, resting beside my dual monitors. That bell serves as far more than a decorative paperweight. It represents the foundation of Pennsylvania, a state deeply steeped in iron fortunes, sprawling brick manners, and rigid generational expectations. Our region stands as a historic cradle of elite education and world-class medicine, breeding a highly competitive, prestige-obsessed culture that my parents absorbed into their very bones. They worship status, but more specifically, they worship male status. The bell on my desk was a quiet gift from a federal contractor, a silent acknowledgement of the sovereign independence I built for myself. Yet my family stared right past it, seeing only a room they intended to conquer. Preston stood near the doorway, radiating the unearned, easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no. He holds a medical degree from a top-tier university. My parents treated his graduation like a royal coronation. They flew business class to his ceremony, hosted extravagant Michelin-star dinners, and practically enshrined his framed diploma in the center of their formal living room. But a medical degree does not automatically grant business acumen. Preston did not want to endure the grueling reality of practicing medicine or treating patients. He wanted the glory of being a tech founder. Over the past 10 years, he launched 3 different medical technology startups. Every single one folded under the weight of his own arrogance. He is a serial entrepreneur who consistently fails upward, burning through angel investments and then running straight back to our father Thomas for a quiet 6-figure bailout to save his reputation. While my parents coddled Preston through his consecutive failures, I carved my own path out of raw granite. I earned a prestigious law degree, graduating at the top of my class, but I did not stop there. I leveraged that specialized legal knowledge to enter the cutthroat, male-dominated world of defense technology. By 26, I was negotiating complex federal acquisitions. I spent my entire 20s working grueling 80-hour weeks. I missed family holidays. I ate dinner from vending machines in secure government facilities at 2 in the morning. I built a formidable reputation as a cold, effective executive who could navigate the labyrinthine legal landscape of military contracts. Yet, whenever I brought my achievements home, my parents treated my career like a trivial, amusing afterthought. A woman working in defense was to them an awkward phase I needed to outgrow before settling down to find a suitable husband. Because I understood their toxic favoritism early on, I knew I had to protect my assets with ironclad borders. When I negotiated my executive compensation packages, I kept the numbers strictly to myself. At 32, I purchased this $800,000 estate in profound secrecy. I spent months vetting the property, ensuring the perimeter security infrastructure met federal standards before I ever signed the deed. I did not invite my parents to a celebratory housewarming party. I did not ask for their blessing or their unsolicited financial advice. I simply changed my mailing address and let them assume I was renting a respectable townhouse in the suburbs. When they finally visited the estate for the first time, their shock hung heavy in the air. They walked through my imported stone entryway, tracing their fingers over the custom millwork, their eyes visibly calculating the raw equity of the architecture. From that specific moment, a silent, dangerous shift occurred in their minds. They stopped viewing my home as my personal sanctuary and started viewing it as a collective family asset, a shiny, rainy day fund waiting to be claimed by the golden son whenever he deemed it necessary. The stark reality of their delusion fully crystallized during a family dinner 2 years ago. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar procurement contract, the crowning achievement of my career up to that point. I sat at my parents' polished mahogany dining table, physically exhausted but deeply proud, and shared the news. I explained the sheer scale of the legal framework I had drafted to secure the deal against fierce international competition. My father paused his crystal wine glass, hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked at me with a mild, condescending squint and asked, "Are you doing the bookkeeping for them now, Adelaide?" He did not ask about the technology. He did not ask about the intricate legal strategy. He assumed that because I am a woman, my role in a multi-million-dollar defense contract must be strictly limited to balancing a ledger. Preston chuckled from across the table, slicing his rare steak with zero regard for the profound insult hanging in the air. That dinner was a heavy boulder crashing down on whatever fragile hope I had left for their genuine respect. It established the core internal conflict of my life. They held a strict, unrelenting refusal to view my earned property and my professional standing as my own. Now that same unrelenting refusal was standing directly in my office, embodied by flattened moving boxes and my mother's strained artificial smile. The entitlement felt like a living, breathing entity sucking the oxygen from the room. Cynthia stepped forward, breaking the long stretch of silence. Her eyes swept over my floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the heavy secure doors, mentally rearranging my furniture. "We are not asking you to leave the state," Adelaide, Cynthia said, softening her voice to mimic genuine maternal concern. "We just need to reorganize the family assets for the future. You have to admit, keeping a house this size for one single woman is a selfish indulgence. Preston and Valerie need a proper foundation for the baby." I looked down at the cardboard boxes resting on my rug. The sheer audacity of their logistics struck a cold nerve. They had not just come to ask for my house, they had come prepared to pack my belongings. They assumed my compliance was so guaranteed that they skipped the entire negotiation phase and moved straight into the execution phase. I noted the printed brand on the side of the moving boxes. They were the exact same cheap bulk-ordered boxes Preston used when he packed up his second failed startup office downtown. The visual irony was razor-sharp. He was using the debris of his professional failures to box up my professional triumph. Valerie sighed loudly, dropping her handbag onto my leather guest chair with a heavy thud. "Can we please just get this moving?" she whined, rubbing her flat stomach as if the gesture alone granted her supreme authority. "The contractor is charging us by the hour to map out the kitchen demolition. I want to pick out the marble slabs for the island by tomorrow morning." The demolition. They were already planning to tear down the walls I had paid for with my own blood and sweat, erasing my existence from the property entirely. The cold, procedural logic of my daily operations took over. In defense technology, when an unauthorized entity attempts to breach a secure perimeter, you do not debate their intentions. You do not ask them politely to leave. You neutralize the threat using the precise protocols established for such an event. My finger rested lightly against the smooth surface of the biometric button under my desk. The countdown in my head was ticking down from 90 seconds. But this hostile invasion did not happen overnight. The seeds for this brazen takeover were planted months ago, disguised neatly beneath the warmth of a family celebration. If I had paid closer attention to the subtle, predatory shifts in their behavior during Thanksgiving dinner, I might have upgraded my security protocols far sooner. The Thanksgiving dinner that set this entire hostile takeover into motion took place precisely 4 months before the moving boxes hit my floor. Hosting my relatives is a rare concession. Usually I spend late November reviewing year-end logistics for government contracts or finalizing cybersecurity procurement budgets. My work demands intense focus, and my home serves as my private sanctuary to decompress from those high-stakes negotiations. However, last autumn, I made the rare decision to invite them to my estate. I wanted to share a quiet, dignified meal. I hired a private chef to prepare the turkey and handle the intricate side dishes because my schedule did not allow for 3 days of cooking. My dining room was arranged impeccably. The long-polished mahogany table sat beneath a vintage crystal chandelier. Crisp white linen napkins rested beside heavy silver cutlery. Everything was orderly and serene until they walked through the front door and shattered the peace. The evening began with their standard passive remarks. My father, Thomas, inspected the imported Italian marble in the foyer and muttered that the upkeep must be a terrible drain on my finances. He always assumes I am secretly struggling to maintain my lifestyle. He cannot fathom that his daughter manages a highly lucrative executive compensation package. Valerie complained about the long drive from their rented duplex, stating that the security gates at the entrance of my neighborhood were too complicated. She acted as though my perimeter defense system was a personal insult designed specifically to inconvenience her. Preston immediately claimed the seat at the head of the dining table. He did not ask. He simply pulled out the heaviest chair and sat down, projecting the unearned authority he carried everywhere. I took a seat near the side, allowing him his petty illusion of control. I preferred to observe anyway. Halfway through the main course, the atmosphere shifted. The private chef had just served the roasted root vegetables when Preston cleared his throat. He reached out and picked up his crystal wine glass, tapping a silver spoon against the delicate rim. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the low hum of the dinner conversation. Thomas paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Cynthia dabbed her lips with a white linen napkin and leaned forward eagerly. Preston stood up, puffing out his chest. He looked around the room, soaking in the undivided attention before delivering his prepared speech. He announced that Valerie was pregnant. The reaction was instant and theatrical. The table erupted in loud, celebratory cheers. Cynthia gasped and covered her mouth with both hands before rushing over to embrace her daughter-in-law. Thomas stood up and clapped Preston on the back, booming loudly about continuing the family legacy. I offered my sincere congratulations. I raised my glass and smiled genuinely, hoping this new chapter might ground my brother and give him a sense of real responsibility. For a brief, fleeting window of time, the room felt warm. It felt like a normal, functioning family celebrating a genuine milestone. But that warmth evaporated the moment my mother's tears dried. Cynthia stepped back from Valerie and wiped her eyes. She did not sit down. Instead, she remained standing and slowly turned her head. I watched her gaze travel across my dining room. She was no longer looking at her son or her pregnant daughter-in-law. She was looking at the architecture. Her eyes meticulously traced the intricate custom crown molding that lined the high ceilings. She stared at the grand French doors leading out to the manicured private gardens and the illuminated stone pathways. Her expression transformed from maternal joy to cold, calculated appraisal. She was taking inventory. "This is it," Cynthia said, her voice cut through the lingering celebratory chatter with chilling clarity. I stopped chewing. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate. "This is the perfect house to raise the new baby in," my mother continued. She walked over to the French doors and rested her hand against the thick glass, looking out at the expansive lawn. "There is so much room out there for a swing set. The neighborhood is incredibly safe because of those gates Valerie complained about earlier. It is truly a beautiful estate." She turned her back to the window and looked directly at me. Her eyes were devoid of any maternal warmth. They were the eyes of a corporate liquidator assessing a bankrupt company. "It is a shame it is wasted on just one person," she said. The insult hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. She did not say, "It is a pity you do not have a family yet." She explicitly stated that my presence in my own home was a waste of prime real estate. According to her logic, my decades of grueling work and my financial independence meant nothing compared to Preston's impending fatherhood. Before I could formulate a measured response, Preston laughed. It was a casual, entitled sound that echoed against the high ceilings. He leaned back in his chair at the head of my table and smiled a wide, arrogant smirk. "Yeah, Addie," Preston agreed readily. "You rattling around in this huge place by yourself makes no sense. Valerie and I were actually just saying on the drive over here that this would be a great neighborhood for the local schools. The district ratings are phenomenal." Valerie nodded enthusiastically, rubbing her stomach. "We really need a place with a strong community foundation," she added. "A studio or a high-rise downtown is fine for a single career woman, but a child needs a real yard." I sat perfectly still. My mind processed the overlapping layers of their audacity. They were sitting at my table, eating food paid for by my salary, and openly discussing how much better my property would serve them. They were not complimenting my success. They were plotting my eviction. At that moment, I made a critical, tactical error. I gave a flat, non-committal smile and picked up my wineglass, taking a slow sip. I assumed this was just their usual boundary-pushing banter. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to their relentless minimizing of my achievements. I thought they were merely expressing jealousy coated in thick, passive remarks. I brushed off the conversation, steering the topic back to the expected due date and the nursery themes. I believed that ignoring their disrespect was the most mature way to handle the situation. I was wrong. My silence was not interpreted as maturity. My silence was interpreted as weakness. By not shutting down the conversation immediately, I inadvertently gave them tacit permission to proceed with their delusion. I treated their comments as a tasteless joke, but they were entirely serious. This was not a fleeting thought born from the excitement of the pregnancy announcement. It was the beginning of an organized, relentless campaign to displace me. They had convinced themselves that a married man inherently outranks a single woman in the family hierarchy, and therefore his needs automatically superseded my legal ownership. The dinner concluded without further incident, but the structural damage was already done. They left my home that evening with full stomachs and a shared unspoken objective. They had surveyed the prize and agreed upon the target. I spent the next few weeks submerged in my defense contracts, unaware that my own blood relatives were actively drafting a strategy to force me out of my sanctuary. I thought the Thanksgiving comments would fade into the background, but 2 weeks later, the casual hints and subtle coveting morphed into a direct formal assault. My parents summoned me for what they disguised as a simple lunch, but it turned out to be the presentation of their most insulting demand yet. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving dinner, the subtle hints hardened into a formal, tactical strike. I received a digital calendar invitation from my father's assistant on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, family planning meeting. The location was set for the Oakwood Country Club, an exclusive establishment where my parents spend their afternoons, projecting status and sipping iced tea. I was in the middle of finalizing a complex procurement algorithm for a federal defense client when the notification popped up on my screen. I stared at the flashing alert. My intuition whispered that the covetous stares from the holiday meal were about to materialize into a tangible threat. I arrived at the club wearing a tailored charcoal suit straight from my corporate headquarters. The valet took my keys, and I navigated the plush, opulent carpets of the main lobby. Stepping out onto the heated veranda overlooking the pristine 18th hole, I spotted them. Thomas and Cynthia occupied a prime corner table shaded by a large green canvas umbrella. My father wore a crisp white polo shirt, leaning back in his wrought iron chair with the relaxed posture of a man who believes he controls every variable in his universe. My mother sat rigidly beside him, adjusting a silk scarf around her neck. There was no warm greeting. There was no casual small talk about my day or my current projects. The moment I took my seat across from them, Thomas leaned forward and placed his hands flat on the glass tabletop. He did not ask what I wanted to drink. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thin, cheap manila folder. He slid it across the smooth glass until it stopped inches from my hands. I looked down at the folder. It was a flimsy, dog-eared piece of stationery. The presentation alone was a profound insult. I spend my days reviewing encrypted, heavily bound dossiers concerning national security protocols. My father was presenting the destruction of my financial independence inside a 79-cent office supply sleeve? "We consulted our estate planner yesterday morning," Thomas said. His voice carried that booming, authoritative cadence he always used to command a room. "We decided it was time to finalize the structural changes we discussed at Thanksgiving. We had the attorney draft a quitclaim deed for your property." I did not touch the folder. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I possess a prestigious law degree. I graduated at the top of my class, and I negotiate intricate, multi-tiered contracts for a living. Yet my father was speaking to me slowly, enunciating his words as if I were a confused child who did not comprehend basic property law. "A quitclaim deed," I repeated. My voice remained perfectly level, betraying none of the cold fury rising in my chest. "Yes," Thomas continued, nodding firmly. "It is the cleanest way to handle the transfer. You will relinquish your ownership rights to the parcel and sign the estate over to Preston. It keeps the transaction private and avoids unnecessary tax complications. To help you with the transition, we are prepared to be generous. Your mother and I will personally cover the cost of a 12-month lease on a studio apartment downtown. We found a very respectable building near the river." I sat there listening to the ice clinking in my mother's water glass. The sheer absurdity of his proposal washed over me like freezing water. They were not asking for a loan. They were not suggesting I sell the house and invest the profits. They were demanding I legally forfeit an $800,000 asset that I purchased with my own grueling labor. They wanted me to surrender my sanctuary so my chronically unemployed brother could have it for free. "Let me ensure I am processing this correctly," I said. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "You want me to sign over my $800,000 home. You want me to give up my equity, my security, and my property, and in exchange, you will pay for 1 year of rent in a single-room apartment?" "You make it sound like a punishment," Cynthia interjected. She frowned, adopting a deeply wounded tone. She pressed her hand against her chest, looking at me as if I had just struck her. "Adelaide, please do not be selfish. We are trying to do what is best for everyone. Preston is starting a real family now." "A real family," I echoed. The words tasted like ash. "Your career is nice," Cynthia said, waving her hand dismissively, as if my role as a defense technology executive was a quaint little hobby. "It keeps you busy, but it is not a legacy. You are a single woman. You do not need multiple bedrooms and an acre of land. Preston is giving us a grandchild. Family is a legacy. It is your duty to help him build that foundation. He needs that house more than you do." That was the boulder. It was the verbal confirmation of the toxic hierarchy I had suspected my entire life. In their eyes, my existence was inherently invalid compared to his. My achievements, my wealth, my boundaries, and my comfort were all expendable resources meant to be harvested for Preston's benefit. They truly believed that a married man outranked a successful woman. They thought they could simply command me to step aside and I would obey out of some twisted sense of daughterly obligation. I looked at my father, who was already pulling a silver pen from his pocket, expecting me to open the folder and sign my life away right there on the veranda. I looked at my mother, who was already planning where to put the nursery furniture. I did not yell. I did not cause a scene or flip the table. Emotional outbursts are a sign of lost control, and I am an expert in maintaining control. I slowly stood up from the wrought iron chair. I smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal skirt. I looked down at the cheap manila folder resting on the glass table and left it exactly where it was. "I am not signing that," I said quietly. "Do not ever ask me for my property again." I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not wait for a response. I walked through the plush lobby, leaving them sitting on the veranda with their flimsy paperwork and the unpaid lunch check. As I handed the valet my ticket and climbed into my car, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I thought, walking away and drawing a firm verbal line would establish my boundary once and for all. I assumed my cold refusal would force them to abandon their delusional scheme, but I severely underestimated the depths of their entitlement. My departure did not end the war. It merely signaled to them that negotiations had failed, and it was time to launch a physical stealth invasion. I believed walking away from that country club veranda effectively closed the negotiation. I assumed my cold departure sent a definitive message to my parents. In any rational world, leaving unexecuted legal documents sitting on a glass table signals a hard boundary. I thought I had drawn a line they would finally respect. However, I severely underestimated the sheer depth of their delusion. I returned to my routine, burying myself in the demanding rhythm of my career. For 6 days, a deceptive silence stretched across my communication channels. No phone calls came through, no text messages demanding an apology lit up my screen. I mistook their quietness for surrender. I thought they were licking their wounds and realizing they had pushed too far. The following Tuesday, I sat inside a secure, windowless briefing room at my corporate headquarters. The environment offered a stark contrast to the plush, sunlit country club. We were running a live simulation for a classified defense contract. The digital screens ahead of me displayed encrypted data streams and satellite telemetry. Because I hold top-tier federal security clearances, my personal infrastructure heavily integrates with my company monitoring systems. My home network, my digital footprint, and my physical estate operate under strict surveillance protocols designed to prevent corporate espionage. My life requires constant vigilance. I cannot afford blind spots. Deep into the complex simulation, my encrypted personal device vibrated against the heavy metal conference table. It was not a standard text notification. It was a localized perimeter alert originating directly from my private estate internal sensors. I excused myself from the high-stakes briefing, stepping out into a soundproof, fluorescent-lit hallway. I authenticated my identity on the screen and pulled up the live, high-definition camera feed covering my residence. The initial expectation was a routine false alarm, perhaps a delivery driver wandering past the front gate or a landscaper arriving off schedule. Instead, the screen displayed a scene that made my blood run ice cold. There, standing right in the center of my private kitchen, were Preston and Valerie. They were not alone. A third person, a man wearing a faded denim work shirt and a heavy canvas tool belt, stood beside them, holding a yellow steel measuring tape. He was stretching the metal band across the width of my kitchen island. I watched the live feed in utter disbelief. They had bypassed my primary gate and entered my sanctuary while I was miles away securing federal contracts. I zoomed in on the footage, tracing their movements through the wide-angle lens. Valerie gestured continuously, her face animated with entitled excitement. I watched as Valerie walked over to my custom Italian cabinetry. These were imported fixtures I spent months sourcing. They were pieces of detailed craftsmanship I paid for with funds earned from grueling international negotiations. Valerie raised her hand and dragged her manicured fingers across the smooth, dark wood finish. Then she made a sharp, forceful downward motion with her arm, mimicking tearing the cabinets straight off the wall. She was openly directing the contractor on how to demolish my kitchen. She laughed, a silent burst of amusement captured on the soundless feed, while Preston nodded in agreement, pointing toward the structural load-bearing wall separating the dining room. The realization of how they gained access hit me like a physical blow. 5 years ago, long before I upgraded the exterior perimeter sensors, I gave my parents a physical brass spare key. It was strictly designated for extreme emergencies, a simple precaution I took when I traveled overseas for weeks at a time. I never asked for it back because I assumed basic human decency prevented a person from using an emergency key to stage a home invasion. I was holding them to a standard of respect they simply did not possess. They weaponized my past trust to facilitate their present greed. Watching my brother command a contractor to measure the walls I owned felt deeply surreal. He strutted across my imported tile floor, acting as though he were already the rightful lord of the manor, surveying his inherited estate. He pointed at the ceiling fixtures, dictating changes to a space he could never afford to build himself. This crossed a terrifying legal line. This was no longer just toxic family dynamics or petty dinner table entitlement. This was an active, premeditated physical invasion. They were trespassing. They were bringing unauthorized strangers into a secure facility without a shred of hesitation. At that exact moment, standing in the cold hallway of my corporate office, a profound internal shift occurred. The last remaining shred of daughterly compliance withered and died inside my chest. For 36 years, I tried to navigate their favoritism. I tried to maintain the peace, hoping my relentless success would eventually earn their genuine respect. I attended the dinners, I absorbed the passive remarks, I let them treat my career like a temporary distraction. But watching Valerie pantomime the destruction of my home killed the sister and the daughter. The imaginary family bond severed entirely, leaving behind only the procedural logic of a defense executive facing an unauthorized breach. The internal conflict evaporated. I stopped viewing Preston as my brother. I stopped viewing Cynthia and Thomas as my parents. They were hostile entities. They were a direct security threat compromising my personal and professional safety. The situation required an immediate clinical response. Most people would have driven home and screamed at them. Most people would have burst through the front door and demanded they leave, fueling the exact kind of dramatic emotional warfare my family thrives on. I do not do emotional warfare. I operate in defense technology. I execute solutions. I stood perfectly still watching the contractor write numbers down on a clipboard. I let them measure the kitchen. I let them plan their imaginary renovations. I let them bask in the false victory of their stealth invasion. I saved the video feed directly to my secure cloud server, meticulously documenting their criminal trespass for future leverage. Then I closed the application and opened my corporate directory. The time for setting verbal boundaries was over. A verbal boundary relies on the other party having a conscience. My family lacked one. It was time to execute a physical barrier they could never cross. I scrolled past my family contacts and tapped the encrypted number for my company private tactical security dispatch. Most people would have left work immediately. The average person witnessing their blood relatives staging an unauthorized home invasion would have marched out of that secure briefing room, grabbed their car keys, and sped down the highway. They would have burst through their own front door, breathless and flushed, ready to engage in a loud, messy confrontation. They would have yelled and pointed fingers, demanding explanations that would never come. That is how traditional family disputes operate. They rely on high-volume emotional turbulence and a chaotic exchange of grievances. But rage is a distinct vulnerability. Rage is sloppy. I operate in the highest echelons of defense technology where yielding to raw emotion compromises mission integrity. I do not do sloppy. I execute calculated solutions. Standing in the fluorescent-lit hallway of my corporate headquarters, I forced my breathing to slow down. I watched the live video feed on my encrypted device with the detached clinical focus of an analyst reviewing hostile troop movements. I watched Preston clap the contractor on the shoulder. I watched Valerie gather her designer handbag and adjust her coat. I let them finish their little measuring session. I let them walk out of my kitchen, secure my front door with their spare key, and drive away in their leased vehicle. I wanted them to leave feeling victorious. A confident adversary is an unobservant adversary. Once the perimeter sensors confirmed their departure, I returned to my briefing. I sat through another hour of satellite telemetry data and algorithmic projections. My colleagues noticed no shift in my demeanor. When the meeting adjourned, I walked back to my private office and closed the door. I did not call my mother to ask why she gave Preston my key. I did not text my brother to warn him against returning. Instead, I made one phone call to the private tactical security firm retained by my company. Within 2 hours, a team arrived at my Pennsylvania estate. They were not local residential locksmiths dispatched from a strip mall. They were highly specialized contractors who design physical infrastructure for federal defense assets. I pulled into my driveway just as 2 black unbranded vehicles parked near my imported stone entryway. 4 technicians stepped out wearing dark tactical uniforms and carrying heavy steel equipment cases. We did not waste time with pleasantries. I authenticated my identity badge and authorized them to begin the immediate hardening of the facility. The process was methodical and swift. I stood in the foyer, listening to the high-pitched whine of industrial drills and the heavy metallic thuds of reinforced hardware hitting the floor. We did not just change the locks. Upgrading to a different metal key would have been a half measure. My family had proven they could not be trusted with traditional access points. Therefore, traditional access points had to be eradicated. The technicians systematically removed every standard residential deadbolt from the exterior doors. They stripped the brass handles and the strike plates, leaving bare, hollow holes in the heavy wood. In their place, they installed biometric thumbprint scanners and encrypted digital keypads. The new hardware was constructed from brushed tungsten steel, designed to withstand extreme blunt force. The scanners emitted a faint, steady blue glow in the dim light of the entryway. This physical hardening of my perimeter mirrored a profound internal shift. Watching the technicians tear out the old locks felt like watching a surgeon excise a toxic growth. The heavy steel plates and the glowing keypads represented the physical manifestation of my emotional detachment. For decades, I had left the door to my life slightly ajar, hoping my parents would eventually walk through it with genuine respect and affection. I had kept the emotional deadbolts unlocked out of a naive sense of daughterly obligation. But the spare key they abused was the final breach. I was sealing the perimeter permanently. I directed the team to upgrade the exterior surveillance network. They replaced the standard motion sensors with high-definition thermal imaging cameras. They positioned new lenses to cover every conceivable angle of the property line the driveway and the private gardens. Finally, they linked the entire localized system directly to my company private security dispatch. If an unauthorized entity attempted to bypass the new keypads or force entry, the system would not dial the local municipal police. It would instantly summon armed federal-grade contractors who operate under strict trespassing protocols. When the installation concluded, the lead technician handed me a small plastic bin containing the old hardware. I walked into my home office and set the bin on my mahogany desk. I reached inside and pulled out the old brass lock cylinder from the kitchen door. It was heavy and cold. The jagged metal pins inside rattled slightly as I turned it over in my palm. The spare key my parents possessed, the key they handed to Preston to orchestrate his little renovation fantasy, was now nothing more than a useless piece of jagged metal. It belonged to a door that no longer existed. I looked at the heavy bronze replica of the Liberty Bell resting near my monitor. It stood as a monument to sovereign independence. I placed the old brass lock cylinder directly next to the bell. It was a silent, physical reminder of the exact day I declared my independence from their toxic hierarchy. I wanted to see it every morning before I started my work. I wanted to remember the cold, exact moment I stopped being their compliant daughter and started treating my home like the fortress it was meant to be. The technicians packed their gear and drove away, leaving me alone in the profound silence of my secure estate. The sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawn. I walked through the empty rooms of my house, listening to the quiet hum of the new encrypted systems. My sanctuary was safe once again. I did not send an angry text message. I did not draft a lengthy email demanding an apology for this stealth invasion. Demanding an apology gives the offender the power to deny it. It initiates a negotiation, and I was done negotiating. I simply closed the heavy reinforced door to my fortress and waited. I knew Preston would return. I knew the contractor needed to survey the load-bearing walls a second time before the baby arrived. I knew my brother would swagger up to my back patio expecting to slide that stolen brass key into a familiar lock. I anticipated the exact sequence of events. He would arrive full of unearned arrogance, ready to demolish my life. But instead of a compliant sister and a wooden door, he would find a tungsten steel keypad and a flashing red light. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out at the darkening Pennsylvania landscape. I settled in to wait for them to realize that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Their entitlement was about to crash headfirst into an immovable object, and the resulting fallout would force them to change their tactics entirely. The trap snapped shut on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 days after the new security infrastructure went online. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, drafting a compliance report, when the localized perimeter alarm chimed softly through my computer speakers. I opened the application and expanded the camera feed. A white commercial van parked at the edge of my private driveway. Preston stepped out of the passenger side, holding 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier. The same contractor from Tuesday followed closely behind, holding his yellow steel measuring tape. My brother walked toward the back patio with a brisk, confident stride. He set the coffees down on an outdoor glass table and reached into his pocket, pulling out the stolen brass key. I watched his face on the high-definition monitor as he approached the door. He extended his hand and then froze. The traditional deadbolt was gone. In its place, a sleek, brushed tungsten steel panel emitted a faint blue glow. Preston stared at the keypad. He leaned in closer as if inspecting a strange artifact. He tried to insert the jagged brass key into a non-existent slot. The metal scraped uselessly against the reinforced casing. His confusion morphed into immediate frustration. He pressed his palm against the glass pane and peered inside the dark kitchen. The contractor stood a few feet away, shifting uncomfortably and checking his watch. Preston slammed his fist against the reinforced doorframe. The impact barely registered on the heavy materials. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, likely debating whether to call me and demand an explanation. But he knew that dialing my number meant admitting he was attempting to break into my residence. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, grabbed the coffees, and stormed back to the van. The vehicle sped away, leaving dark tire marks on my pristine driveway. I sat in the quiet of my home office waiting for the inevitable explosion. I expected Thomas to call and bellow about family disrespect. I anticipated a barrage of frantic text messages from Cynthia. I prepared my legal responses, cataloging every statute regarding criminal trespass. But the hours ticked by, and my phone remained entirely silent. The confrontation never materialized. My family realized they could no longer force their way into my physical space. Therefore, they pivoted their strategy. They avoided a direct tactical engagement and chose instead to wage an asymmetrical war in the only arena they truly understood. Cynthia went to war socially. In the elite, prestige-obsessed circles of Pennsylvania high society, reputation functions as currency. My parents spent decades cultivating an image of flawless generational wealth. They viewed my resistance not merely as disobedience, but as a public relations crisis that required immediate spin. The smear campaign launched on a Sunday afternoon at the Oakwood Country Club. The venue provided the perfect backdrop for character assassination, disguised as polite concern. The rumor spread over silver trays of cucumber sandwiches and tall crystal glasses of iced tea. It was a vicious, calculated lie wrapped tightly in the suffocating gentility of country club politics. Cynthia sat on the veranda, surrounded by influential wives of local judges, real estate developers, and hospital administrators. She wore a somber expression, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a crisp linen napkin. She leaned forward and lowered her voice, weaving a tragic narrative for her captive audience. Cynthia told them that the intense pressure of my corporate career had finally broken me. She painted a picture of a frail, unstable spinster who succumbed to the crushing stress of defense technology negotiations. According to her fabricated story, I was suffering from a severe mental break. I was locking myself inside my estate, experiencing paranoid delusions, and acting hostile toward my own loving family. But Cynthia did not stop at playing the grieving mother. She elevated Preston to the role of a tragic hero. She spun a beautiful fiction where my brother was graciously stepping in to manage my affairs. She told her wealthy friends that Preston was sacrificing his own time, moving into my estate to oversee my daily care because I was no longer competent to live alone. She weaponized his medical degree, using his status as a former physician to lend clinical authority to her gossip. The women on the veranda gasped in sympathy, praising Preston for his noble dedication, while simultaneously erasing my entire legacy. The whispers traveled fast, In those exclusive circles, a scandalous secret moves faster than a wire transfer. The rumors reached me by Tuesday morning. A junior partner at a prominent corporate law firm who occasionally golfed with my father called my private line. He phrased his questions delicately, asking if I needed a leave of absence or a referral to a discreet wellness retreat. The sheer audacity of the lie took my breath away. I realized exactly what my parents were attempting to accomplish. The country club gossip was not just petty revenge for the changed locks. It was a deliberate, calculated legal strategy. They were actively laying the groundwork for an involuntary conservatorship. By seeding the narrative of my mental incompetence among judges and doctors, they hoped to build a credible public consensus. They wanted to force me into a corner where I felt so socially ashamed and isolated that I would quietly hand over the deed to save face. They believed the threat of public embarrassment would compel me to submit to their control. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess. They failed to realize they were playing against a defense executive who writes the rules of engagement. In the insular world of country club luncheons, a rumor might destroy a reputation. But in the highly regulated world of federal defense contracting, rumors mean nothing without empirical data. My family forgot one crucial detail about my profession. Because I handle classified military procurement algorithms, my psychological stability is not a matter of public opinion. It is a matter of national security. I undergo rigorous federally mandated psychological evaluations every single year. A board of government-cleared psychiatrists scrutinizes my mental fortitude, my decision-making capabilities, and my stress responses. My medical files are pristine. I hold clearances that require a level of psychological endurance my brother could not even begin to comprehend. Cynthia and Thomas thought they were merely gossiping to gain leverage. They did not realize their behavior crossed a very dangerous legal threshold. Falsely claiming a federal contractor is suffering from a mental break in front of influential community members is not just a polite social maneuver. It is legally actionable defamation. Their lies could theoretically jeopardize my security clearance and my lucrative contracts. They had handed me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy their remaining social standing. Sitting in my secure office, I drafted a detailed timeline of their actions: the unauthorized use of the spare key, the physical attempt to breach the biometric locks, the coordinated dissemination of defamatory statements. A cold, calculated question began to form in my mind. Why were they going to such extreme, treacherous lengths just to secure a house for Preston? Entitlement and toxic favoritism could explain the Thanksgiving dinner remarks and the initial demands, but risking a defamation lawsuit and orchestrating a fake conservatorship required a different kind of motivation. People do not risk everything they have unless they are terrified of losing it all. The narrative of Preston needing a yard for his new baby was a convenient emotional smokescreen. I knew my brother. I knew my parents. They were hiding something much darker beneath their desperate grab for my equity. I closed the incident log on my computer. I opened a new encrypted browser window connecting directly to the public county records database and premium background check portals. I did not need to confront them at the country club to find out the truth. I simply needed to follow the money. As I initiated a deep financial audit on my own family, the real motive behind their relentless attacks slowly began to surface on my monitor. The silence of my home office provided the perfect environment for a clinical investigation. Entitlement easily explains greedy remarks over a Thanksgiving turkey. Toxic favoritism explains my mother demanding I move into a cramped downtown studio to appease her golden child. But risking a defamation lawsuit by spreading rumors of my mental instability across the county elite required a different catalyst. Desperation breeds recklessness. I needed to uncover the root cause of that desperation. While Cynthia sipped her iced tea and spun her fictional narratives to her wealthy friends, I did what defense executives do best. I ran a comprehensive systemic audit. My daily operations involve vetting international contractors and identifying hidden liabilities before the government signs a billion-dollar check. I do not rely on emotions. I do not rely on assumptions. I rely on verifiable data. I opened a new encrypted browser on my heavy mahogany desk. The soft blue light from the dual monitors illuminated the bronze Liberty Bell replica resting nearby. I did not require a specialized accountant to uncover the truth. In the state of Pennsylvania, county records are public. Standard background check portals provide enough raw material to dismantle any carefully constructed facade if you know exactly where to look. I began my search with Preston. My brother always presented himself as a visionary founder. He wore tailored suits imported from Italy. He drove a leased European sports car. He talked endlessly about disrupting the medical industry with his innovative genius. I typed his legal name and the title of his latest venture into the state business registry. The results populated instantly. The status of his primary limited liability company did not read active. It read dissolved. I dug deeper, pulling up court filings and creditor claims from the local judicial database. The numbers painted a brutal, uncompromising picture. His medical technology venture had not just failed, it had imploded in a staggering, spectacular fashion. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to private investors, equipment suppliers, and commercial real estate leasing agents. Preston was drowning in an ocean of debt. He had zero income and zero liquid assets. The smug man who dropped cardboard boxes on my Persian rug was entirely insolvent. The trail of financial ruin did not stop at my brother. Preston lacked the personal credit history to secure those initial startup loans alone. A bank does not hand out a mountain of capital to a serial failure without a solid guarantee. Someone with substantial verified collateral had to sign the dotted line. I cross-referenced the creditor filings with my parents' names. The search engine refreshed, returning a heavy multi-page PDF document. It was a formal loan guarantee. My father, Thomas Vance, had co-signed every single one of those disastrous notes. I stared at the digital signature on the screen. The man who scoffed at my corporate achievements, who treated my career like a trivial bookkeeping exercise, had tied his entire financial existence to a sinking ship. His unearned arrogance blinded him to his son's incompetence. I needed to see the full extent of the structural damage. I logged into the county property tax database and entered the address of my parents' pristine, sprawling estate. This was the home where I grew up. It was the crown jewel of their social identity, the physical proof of their generational wealth. The screen loaded, displaying the deed history and the registered encumbrances. I scrolled down to the recent filings, my breath caught in my throat. 6 months ago, Thomas and Cynthia had taken out a secondary mortgage on their primary residence. They extracted every available cent of equity to keep Preston's failing company afloat. They mortgaged their legacy to fund his delusion, but they were out of time. 2 weeks ago, the lender filed a formal notice of default. The bank was circling their estate, preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. The puzzle pieces clicked together with sickening precision. My family was broke. The reality was so stark it almost felt absurd. The people judging my single lifestyle and measuring my kitchen cabinets were on the verge of total financial collapse. Suddenly, the timeline made perfect, terrifying sense. The Thanksgiving dinner, where they first openly coveted my property, occurred right around the time the secondary mortgage funds dried up. The demand for the quitclaim deed, the sudden urgency for Valerie to have a yard, the illegal attempt to change my locks, all of it was a calculated scheme born from sheer financial terror. They did not want my house to build a nursery. They did not care about finding a strong neighborhood foundation for a grandchild. They desperately needed the $800,000 in raw equity sitting securely inside my walls. The entire narrative about Preston starting a real family was nothing but a manipulative smokescreen. It was a convenient emotional weapon designed to guilt me into surrendering my sanctuary. They planned to force me out under the guise of sisterly duty. Once my name was removed from the deed, they would immediately sell or leverage my property to pay off the catastrophic debts. They intended to cannibalize my hard-earned stability to save themselves from total public ruin. If I had yielded to their pressure, if I had signed that flimsy paper folder on the country club veranda, I would have lost everything. I would have handed over my life savings just so they could preserve their false status for a few more months. They would have drained my accounts and moved on without a second thought, leaving me to rebuild from nothing. The betrayal ran far deeper than petty favoritism. It was a calculated, predatory extraction. The cold anger I felt earlier vanished entirely, replaced by a deep, settling calm. Knowledge is the ultimate equalizer. For weeks they operated under the assumption that I was a naive, compliant target. They thought their country club prestige shielded their secrets. But the numbers do not lie. I downloaded the bankruptcy filings, the loan guarantees, and the secondary mortgage documents. I saved them to an encrypted flash drive, locking them away like live ammunition. The dynamic had permanently shifted. I held all the cards. I knew their secret, and they were rapidly running out of time. Their social gossip would not satisfy their creditors. Whispering lies to the local elite would not stop a bank from seizing their home. The foreclosure deadlines were approaching fast, pressing them into a corner. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the live feed from my perimeter cameras. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. I knew their next move would abandon all pretense of polite negotiation or stealthy manipulation. The covert invasion failed, the social shaming failed. Only one option remained. They were going to orchestrate a direct, desperate assault. I left the monitors running and walked into my kitchen to pour a cup of black coffee. I was ready for whatever they planned to try next. The inevitable climax initiated on a crisp Thursday morning. The autumn air carried a sharp chill that perfectly mirrored my internal disposition. Inside my secure home office, I reviewed encrypted supply chain logistics for a massive naval contract. My daily routine involves analyzing high-stakes data streams and mitigating potential international risks. That intense focus broke abruptly when the localized perimeter alarms initiated a pulsing red sequence across my dual monitors. The newly installed thermal cameras detected multiple large masses breaching the primary driveway entrance. I leaned forward, tapping the mechanical keyboard to expand the high-definition video feed. A massive yellow commercial moving vehicle reversed slowly onto my pristine, stamped concrete driveway. The heavy diesel engine vibrated violently, shaking the dormant rose bushes flanking the front gate. Immediately following the transport truck, two familiar luxury sedans parked haphazardly across the manicured lawn, crushing the expensive landscaping. Four distinct individuals piled out of the vehicles. Preston emerged first, wearing casual athletic gear, as if preparing for a strenuous physical workout. Valerie followed closely behind him. Thomas and Cynthia exited the second car, slamming their doors with profound, aggressive authority. They did not arrive empty-handed. My relatives dragged thick stacks of flattened cardboard cartons and multiple rolls of heavy-duty shipping tape. Valerie gripped a large plastic clipboard, flipping through attached pages with excessive theatricality. During her brief 20s, she worked as a mid-tier wedding coordinator. She clearly decided to resurrect that dormant persona, acting as the self-appointed project manager for the systematic theft of my livelihood. She pointed her pen toward the garage, issuing rapid commands to the hired drivers who stood near the bumper. The sheer volume of their audacity bordered on cinematic delusion. The two hired men standing near the large transport vehicle looked noticeably uncomfortable. They wore matching gray uniforms and shifted their weight nervously from side to side. Professional movers operate on clear schedules with explicit access instructions. They are not accustomed to arriving at a secure luxury estate only to watch the supposed property owners attempt to orchestrate an unauthorized entry. One of the drivers pulled out a crumpled invoice, checking the address against the mailbox numbers. He tried to ask Valerie a question, but she merely swatted her manicured hand in the air, dismissing his valid concerns. She treated the laborers with the same condescending disdain she reserved for anyone who could not advance her social standing. This operation was a highly calculated incursion. My father built his moderate fortune using this exact predatory strategy. Back in his prime commercial real estate days, Thomas would physically overwhelm hesitant sellers, showing up with demolition crews before contracts were finalized. He loved forcing compliance through aggressive momentum and pure intimidation. Today, he was deploying that same toxic technique against his own offspring. Their collective intention was brutally transparent. They planned to barge inside, spread their packing materials everywhere, and physically dismantle my sanctuary piece by piece. By creating an immediate, chaotic reality, they hoped to inflict maximum emotional distress. Abusers frequently utilize this overwhelming tactic. They manufacture a high-pressure situation and refuse to vacate the premises, betting that the victim will eventually capitulate simply to escape the exhausting psychological warfare. They wanted to wear me down. They wanted to pack my clothes box, up my kitchenware, and force me to sign the property deed just to make the shouting stop. They assumed my feminine conditioning would override my logical training, causing me to fold under family pressure. They marched confidently toward the front entryway, but abruptly stopped. The glowing tungsten biometric scanner remained an insurmountable barrier. I watched Preston shake his head, warning the others about the upgraded hardware he discovered days earlier. Pivoting their formation, the invading party navigated around the side yard, marching directly toward my rear patio. The backyard features massive floor-to-ceiling reinforced window panels, providing an unobstructed view of my cooking and living area. They gathered on the stone pavers, resembling an angry mob, demanding unearned tribute. Thomas balled his hand into a heavy fist and began hammering forcefully against the thick, translucent pane. Cynthia pressed her face against the surface, shouting demands that the soundproof glazing rendered entirely mute. Her mouth moved frantically, while her hands slapped the exterior, leaving oily smudges on the pristine material. Preston grabbed a metal lawn chair, scraping it across the patio to stand on it, attempting to peer over the automated motorized blinds. Cynthia, meanwhile, transitioned from aggressive pounding to a pathetic theatrical display. Realizing the physical barrier would not yield, she attempted to leverage maternal guilt. She pressed her palms against the glass and dramatically slid down to her knees, weeping exaggerated tears. She wanted me to see a broken mother begging for access to her cruel daughter. It was a spectacular performance worthy of a daytime television drama. However, because I had uncovered their catastrophic financial ruin just days prior, her tears held absolutely no power. I knew she was not crying out of rejected love. She was weeping because the commercial bank was threatening to repossess her own mansion, and my locked door represented her impending bankruptcy. I observed their frantic movements through the secure digital portal for a full, uninterrupted minute. The high-resolution lens captured everything with surgical clarity. I noted the specific discount retail brand printed on their moving cartons. I observed the aggressive pulse throbbing in my brother's neck as he yelled unheard insults at my empty kitchen. Most prominently, I studied the incredibly smug, arrogant expression plastered across my father's aging face. He genuinely believed his sheer physical presence would shatter my defenses. He thought I would cower in a corner, tearfully apologizing for my defiance before unlocking the barrier. Most women facing 4 angry relatives and a commercial transit vehicle would experience profound terror. The prospect of losing your home to a hostile familial takeover usually induces panic and desperate bargaining. I felt absolutely zero fear. I felt no anxiety. Instead, a cold, deep satisfaction washed over my consciousness. For weeks, they manipulated the narrative operating in the shadows of country club gossip and stolen keys. Now they were committing their crimes in broad daylight, fully exposed to my advanced surveillance network. They believed they were initiating a forceful eviction. In reality, they had walked blindly into an inescapable snare. Every single action they took was being recorded, processed, and stored on a remote encrypted server. The legal definitions of trespassing, harassment, and attempted burglary were materializing right on my screen. They were documenting their own downfall with remarkable efficiency. They handed me the exact evidence required to neutralize their threat forever. The pounding on the glass intensified, echoing faintly through the reinforced walls of my estate. Valerie waved her clipboard, aggressively tapping her pen against the window pane. Preston kicked the bottom of the door frame, testing the structural integrity of the steel locking mechanism. They demanded entry. They demanded complete submission to their financial desperation. They needed my equity to save their sinking ship, and they were willing to destroy my life to get it. They refused to accept that the compliant daughter they once manipulated was completely gone, replaced by a ruthless corporate executive. I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, enjoying the rich, bitter flavor. The contrast between their chaotic desperation outside and my serene control inside was absolutely delicious. I reached across the mahogany desk, retrieving my secure cellular device. My thumb hovered over the encrypted emergency contact icon designated for my private tactical dispatch unit. The time for silent observation had concluded. The moment for absolute destruction had arrived. I pressed the button, initiating a sequence of events that would permanently dismantle their arrogant illusion. The operator answered immediately, and I requested a full, armed response to a hostile home invasion. The trap was ready to snap shut, and they had no idea what was coming. I pressed the heavy silver handle downward. The biometric deadbolts disengaged with a solid mechanical thud echoing across the paved exterior. Pushing the reinforced glass barrier aside, I stepped onto the cold, imported stone terrace. The autumn breeze carried a bitter frost, but the dark roast beverage inside my ceramic mug provided a comforting warmth. The chaotic pounding against my home ceased instantly. The invading party froze in their tracks. Their faces shifted rapidly from aggressive frustration to triumphant expectation. They genuinely believed my physical appearance signaled total surrender. They thought their coordinated intimidation tactics finally cracked my defensive perimeter. My mother initiated the theatrical performance. Cynthia spent decades mastering the art of weaponized pity among her wealthy country club peers. She approached me slowly, clasping her manicured hands together near her chest. Her facial features contorted into a highly practiced mask of fabricated sympathy. She tilted her head, deploying a soft, condescending tone. "Adelaide, sweetheart," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial maternal concern. "We know you are struggling right now. We understand the professional pressure is just too much for you to handle alone. We are here to help you pack your things. It is time to stop being stubborn and let your family take care of you." Her performance was utterly nauseating. She spoke to me as if addressing a confused toddler or a mentally unstable patient. She entirely ignored the reality that I managed international defense budgets while she squandered her husband's dwindling fortune on frivolous social events. She wanted to frame this illegal eviction as a rescue mission. Before I could dismantle her insulting facade, Preston shoved past our mother. He carried a large bundle of flattened cardboard cartons tucked firmly under his left arm. He tossed the stack directly at my leather boots. The heavy paper slapped against the stone pavers with a dull thud. My brother always utilized aggressive physical gestures to compensate for his complete lack of actual authority. He operated his ruined medical tech startup with this exact arrogant swagger, barking orders at unpaid interns while his corporate accounts bled dry. He pointed a stiff finger directly at my chest. "I called a premium real estate agent," he commanded, his voice loud and gratingly confident. "We are listing this place on Monday morning. You can take the spare guest room at Mom and Dad's house until you find a cheap studio apartment somewhere closer to your office." The sheer magnitude of his disrespect hung heavy in the crisp morning air. This man, who secretly drowned in insurmountable commercial debt, was attempting to forcibly evict me from a property I fully owned. He possessed zero legal standing, zero financial leverage, and absolutely zero moral high ground. Yet his towering delusion propelled him to dictate my living arrangements as if he were a feudal lord redistributing peasant lands. He genuinely expected me to abandon a sprawling, secure sanctuary and accept confinement in a tiny suburban guest bedroom so he could liquidate my hard-earned equity. He wanted to harvest my life to fertilize his colossal failure. I looked down at the discarded corrugated boxes resting against my footwear. I slowly raised my gaze, meeting my brother's furious, expectant stare. No. I delivered that single syllable with absolute clinical precision. The word exited my mouth completely devoid of emotion. It contained no anger, no fear, and zero negotiation. It functioned as a flat, impenetrable concrete wall. The blunt rejection completely shattered their illusion of an easy victory. Thomas stepped forward aggressively, inserting his massive frame between Preston and Cynthia. During his prime commercial property days, my father destroyed rival developers using this exact, intimidating physical presence. He broadened his broad shoulders and lowered his chin, deploying his most stern patriarchal tone. "Do not do this," Addie Thomas warned, his voice rumbling like a distant approaching thunderstorm. "You are single. You have no husband and no children. You simply do not need this massive space. Your brother is starting a real family. We are completing this transition today, with or without your active cooperation." His statement clarified everything. The phrase, "real family," served as their ultimate twisted justification for cannibalizing my assets. In their broken hierarchy, a married man facing catastrophic bankruptcy ranked infinitely higher than a successful, unmarried female executive. Thomas demanded my submission not because Preston deserved the property, but because acknowledging his golden son's monumental failure would destroy his own fragile ego. My father would rather render his only daughter homeless than admit to his wealthy friends that he co-signed disastrous business loans for an incompetent heir. The facade of the growing family was merely a shield to hide their impending financial ruin. I did not argue. Arguing validates the opponent's faulty premise. I slowly raised the ceramic mug to my lips and took a deliberate, measured sip of the dark liquid. The rich, bitter flavor coated my tongue. I lowered the cup and let my eyes drift over the 4 hostile invaders standing on my expensive terrace. I observed Valerie tightly clutching her plastic clipboard, shifting her weight nervously from side to side. I watched Cynthia adjusting her designer scarf, trying desperately to maintain her delicate, caring facade. I saw Preston clenching his jaw, masking his profound financial terror with unearned arrogance. I studied Thomas, whose aging face flushed bright red with rising patriarchal fury. They breathed the crisp air within my sovereign territory, entirely oblivious to the monumental error they just committed. They viewed me as a disobedient child, requiring forceful, immediate correction. They completely failed to comprehend the massive retaliatory machinery their arrival had already triggered. They assumed they controlled the current battlefield. They did not realize they were currently standing inside a sealed tactical environment. My private security dispatch received the hostile incursion alert several minutes ago. Heavily armed contractors were already hurtling down the highway toward my precise location. I lowered the beverage container, holding it steady by my side. I met my father's furious gaze with the cold, dead stare of a woman who negotiates with ruthless foreign military contractors. I removed all residual familial warmth from my vocal cords. "You have exactly 90 seconds to get off my property," I stated. I delivered the parameter clearly. I did not yell. I did not gesture wildly. I issued a firm, irrevocable deadline. The declaration hung suspended in the freezing morning breeze. My relatives stared back in stunned, absolute silence. They expected shouting tears or desperate pleading. They did not expect a calm, tactical countdown. The sheer absolute confidence radiating from my rigid posture momentarily paralyzed their aggressive advance. But arrogant desperation acts as a potent, dangerous narcotic. Thomas blinked rapidly, his face contorting into an expression of raw, unfiltered rage. He balled his massive hands into tight fists, taking a threatening step forward. The invisible timer began ticking away, and instead of retreating to their vehicles, my family chose to double down on their catastrophic mistake, setting the stage for a devastating physical confrontation. Preston erupted into a fit of laughter. The noise emerged as a loud, ugly bark bouncing off the expensive stone facade of my residence and echoing across the pristine lawn. It represented the sound of a deeply insecure individual pretending to hold absolute authority over a situation he fundamentally misunderstood. He tossed his head back, displaying a grotesque level of unearned confidence. He genuinely perceived my 90-second warning as a hollow bluff designed to scare him. He glanced at our parents, seeking their silent approval, before turning his vicious gaze back toward me, or what he mocked, his voice dripping with condescending venom. "You intend to call the municipal police on your own flesh and blood? Go ahead and dial. We will simply inform the local dispatcher you are experiencing a severe mental episode. We will state you are hallucinating and acting violently toward your loving relatives." His threat illuminated the true sinister nature behind their recent country club smear campaign. Cynthia had not merely been gossiping for social sympathy among her wealthy peers, she had been actively constructing a preemptive legal defense for this exact property invasion. They planted the narrative of my psychological breakdown among the regional elite specifically so they could weaponize that rumor when law enforcement eventually arrived. They assumed a standard patrol officer would pull up, assess the visual scene, observe a well-dressed, concerned group standing near a supposed hysterical spinster, and immediately side with the aggressive intruders. Valerie smirked from the sidelines. She tapped her plastic clipboard against her thigh, clearly thrilled by her husband's assertive performance. They remained entirely confident in their rehearsed deception. They believed they had effectively cornered their target by utilizing societal bias combined with fabricated medical concerns. But my operational playbook belonged to an entirely different theater of reality. I did not engage with his childish taunting. I refused to argue the validity of my psychological fortitude or threaten them with impending lawsuits. Explaining tactical consequences to a hostile entity represents a profound waste of breath. I simply turned around and walked back inside my kitchen, leaving the reinforced patio door wide open behind me. My deliberate retreat only fueled their collective delusion. I could hear Cynthia gasping in victorious relief, assuming my departure signaled ultimate capitulation. I moved smoothly through the immaculate kitchen, passing the imported cabinetry Valerie had pantomimed destroying just days prior. I entered my quiet, temperature-controlled workspace and took a seat at my heavy mahogany desk. An average citizen facing an unauthorized incursion reaches for a cellular device and dials public emergency services. They endure a lengthy, frustrating conversation with a municipal operator explaining their address, the nature of the crisis, and their relationship to the perpetrators. They must wait anxiously for an underpaid patrol unit to navigate unpredictable city traffic. I absolutely do not rely on public infrastructure to guarantee my personal safety. As an executive managing highly classified national defense assets, my physical security protocols mirror strict federal standards. I did not pick up any phone. Instead, I reached underneath the thick wooden surface of my workspace. My fingers located a hidden recessed panel bolted to the underside. I pressed my right thumb firmly against the smooth glass of a biometric scanner. The automated system read my unique dermal print and authenticated my clearance identity in a fraction of a single second. A faint chime resonated from the computer console, confirming the silent alarm activation. This mechanism was not a distressed plea requesting local police intervention. This button functioned as a direct encrypted summons to my retained on-call private protective detail. These responders were not standard civilian guards patrolling a retail shopping center. They were elite independent contractors holding high-level government clearances trained specifically to neutralize immediate threats surrounding high-value defense vendors. The digital signal transmitted my exact geographic coordinates, along with a hostile breach code that authorized the swift physical extraction of all unauthorized personnel. While the silent transmission beamed across encrypted satellite channels, a chaotic scene continued unfolding outside my reinforced window panes. Preston had interpreted my silence as complete surrender. He marched closer to the patio threshold, shouting rapid administrative instructions. He ordered his wife to start assembling the corrugated cardboard boxes immediately. He commanded the hired transit laborers to bring their moving dollies closer to the rear entrance. The sheer, suffocating arrogance floating through the crisp autumn air felt truly astounding. Thomas stood proudly beside his son, patting Preston on the shoulder, as if the ruined entrepreneur had just conquered a hostile foreign nation. Cynthia began narrating aloud which of my expensive living room furniture pieces they should load into the transport truck first. They were happily dividing my accumulated spoils before they even crossed the physical threshold. Unintended. I simply sat resting in my ergonomic leather chair, keeping both hands flat on the smooth desk surface. I fixed my unwavering gaze on the analog clock mounted on the far wall. The red, sweeping second hand ticked forward with rhythmic mechanical precision. I listened closely to the sharp sound of packing tape ripping aggressively off a plastic dispenser outside. I heard Valerie complaining loudly about the dropping temperature, demanding the workers hurry the loading process. The invading party remained entirely oblivious to the monumental wave of severe consequences hurtling rapidly toward their location. Every passing moment cemented their criminal trespassing charges into permanent public record. I monitored the digital perimeter feeds on my dual screens, watching the arrogant intruders revel in their temporary fabricated triumph. Exactly 90 seconds after I issued my final verbal warning, the environment outside my estate fundamentally altered. The heavy wrought iron gates securing my primary driveway did not slide open at their usual leisurely pace. They swung outward violently, triggered by a remote digital master override code. The harsh mechanical screech of the metal hinges violently interrupted Preston's ongoing shouting. A massive black armored sport utility vehicle, equipped with heavily tinted ballistic windows, roared onto the stamped concrete property line. The high-performance internal combustion engine growled aggressively, completely drowning out the idle hum of the yellow commercial transport truck. The black vehicle accelerated up the slight incline before braking sharply directly behind my father's parked luxury sedan, effectively trapping their only escape route. The entire invasion party froze simultaneously. The unformed cardboard carton slipped from Valerie's manicured hands, tumbling onto the frost-covered grass below. Preston stopped speaking mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open as he stared blankly at the imposing automotive machine. The four doors of the black vehicle opened in perfect synchronized unison. Two massive, heavily muscled men stepped out onto the driveway paving. They did not wear standard recognizable police uniforms. They wore unmarked dark tactical vests, fitted over long-sleeve moisture-wicking combat shirts. Coiled acoustic earpieces ran from their thick collars up into their right ears. They moved with a terrifying, calculated efficiency, displaying the unmistakable rigid posture of enforcement professionals who absolutely never repeat their instructions twice. The immediate shift in the atmospheric power dynamic became palpable even through the secure high-definition camera feeds. My father took a hesitant, clumsy step backward, his previous patriarchal bluster evaporating instantly in the presence of actual formidable physical enforcement. Cynthia clutched her expensive designer scarf, her fabricated maternal pity replaced immediately by genuine unfiltered panic. The hired transit laborers took one single look at the heavily armored defense contractors and immediately retreated toward the cab of their yellow truck, wanting absolutely zero involvement in this rapidly escalating disaster. Preston stood completely rooted to the stone patio, his boastful taunts dying permanently in his throat. He looked from the imposing tactical personnel back toward the open door of my home, finally realizing his pathetic country club gossip held absolutely no jurisdiction upon this battlefield. The 90 seconds had officially expired, and the brutal, unyielding consequences of their desperate financial failure had finally arrived upon my doorstep. The two private protective operatives navigated across the meticulously manicured lawn with a terrifying synchronized fluidity. Their official surnames were Miller and Vance, though the latter shared absolutely zero genetic connection to my treacherous lineage. They did not sprint. They did not jog. They advanced with a measured, deliberate cadence conveying absolute lethal authority. In the ordinary civilian sphere, individuals rush when panic sets in. Within the high-stakes realm of federal asset defense, rapid movements indicate an unacceptable loss of control. These specialists possess total command over the surrounding environment. Their thick, reinforced boots crushed the frost-covered grass, coming to a precise halt exactly 6 feet away from my stunned relatives. Miller positioned himself slightly ahead of his partner. He was a broad-shouldered military veteran who dedicated a full decade to guarding sensitive overseas installations before transitioning into the highly lucrative private sector. His facial features resembled a chiseled block of weathered granite, completely devoid of any recognizable emotion or hesitation. "Sir, ma'am, you are currently trespassing upon a highly classified facility," he stated. He refused to yell, yet his vocal tone carried a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated clearly through the crisp autumn atmosphere. "I must advise you to step away from the primary residential structure immediately." My father reacted using the only methodology he understood. Thomas inflated his barrel chest, attempting to resurrect the domineering ghosts of his former commercial real estate glory. During the late 90s, he completely dominated local zoning board assemblies through sheer physical intimidation, shouting down timid municipal clerks and ruthlessly bullying rival land developers. He genuinely hypothesized that this same archaic bluster could successfully neutralize a highly trained tactical expert. "Do you have any earthly idea who you are addressing?" Thomas bellowed, his aging face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am this property owner's father. This constitutes family territory. You function as my daughter's employees, which translates to you answering directly to my authority. Stand down and vacate my driveway before I have both of you incarcerated." Miller remained entirely unbothered. He refrained from blinking. The contractor merely reached inside the hidden breast pocket of his dark ballistic vest. He extracted a crisply folded white document, extending his arm to hand the paper directly toward my irate patriarch. Thomas snatched the page, unfolding the corners with violent, aggressive jerks. The bright morning sunlight brilliantly illuminated the heavy embossed letterhead belonging to my corporate legal division. This was no standard municipal citation. It constituted a customized, heavily vetted judicial injunction prepared specifically for hostile familial incursions. This specific location houses highly sensitive classified technology materials. Miller elaborated his cadence, remaining perfectly flat and strictly conversational. "Any unauthorized perimeter breach constitutes a severe felony under strict national security guidelines. You have formally received a binding criminal trespass warning. If you fail to retreat toward your designated transport vehicles within 30 seconds, my team is legally authorized to detain you, utilizing whatever physical force proves necessary until armed federal marshals arrive to initiate permanent custody transfers." The explicit mention of federal marshals struck the invading group like a devastating physical blow. The fabricated alternate reality they meticulously constructed inside their insulated country club bubbles instantly shattered against the immovable bedrock of statutory law. My mother's carefully maintained socialite armor cracked wide open, exposing the terrified woman hiding beneath the designer fabrics. Cynthia turned completely pale, her complexion perfectly matching the shade of the legal document trembling violently within her husband's massive hands. She suddenly comprehended that absolutely no amount of wealthy gossip or polite luncheon manipulation could shield her from a catastrophic federal indictment. Standing beside her, Preston abruptly dropped his roll of heavy-duty shipping tape. The plastic dispenser impacted the stone pavers, generating a pathetic hollow clatter. My brother continually possessed a fragile, brittle ego, specifically designed to mask deep-seated cowardice. His entire medical technology enterprise collapsed precisely because he crumbled whenever serious venture capitalists demanded actual, rigorous financial accountability. Facing a heavily armed professional detailing extended prison sentences caused his false bravado to evaporate into thin air. Valerie similarly abandoned her ridiculous project manager delusion. She lowered her clipboard, attempting to hide the plastic slab behind her expensive winter coat, as if concealing the mundane object might erase her active complicity in an attempted burglary. The hired transit laborers, having absorbed enough legally terrifying terminology, quietly abandoned their rolling dollies and sprinted rapidly toward the safety of their yellow transport cab. The 4 remaining invaders turned their heads simultaneously, staring directly at my position. I remained standing calmly just inside the open patio doorway, cradling my warm ceramic mug. Their widened eyes pleaded silently for mercy. They were anxiously waiting for me to call off the proverbial guard dogs. They desperately expected the historically compliant daughter, the sister, who continually absorbed their cruel insults and maintained the peace, to magically reappear and rescue them from the brutal consequences of their own reckless actions. They desired me to laugh out loud, dismiss the armed personnel, and invite the whole group inside for a warm, civilized discussion regarding the surrender of my life savings. I inhaled a slow, deep breath, tasting the bitter, acidic notes of my dark roast coffee. I vividly recalled my early formative years, navigating cutthroat procurement negotiations across Washington. A senior executive mentor once taught me a crucial strategy regarding how to handle arrogant vendors who stubbornly refuse to honor their contractual obligations. When an adversary attempts to manipulate your emotional state using manufactured guilt, you must surgically extract all emotion from the tactical equation entirely. "Let the paper speak," I said quietly, echoing that old, incredibly valuable mantra. Those 5 simple words permanently sealed their fate. I offered 0 further explanations, no tearful apologies, and absolutely 0 bargaining opportunities. I merely stepped backward into my pristine kitchen and pressed a button, allowing the automated motorized blinds to slowly descend, completely shielding my sanctuary from their toxic, suffocating presence. Outside on the terrace, Miller and Vance initiated the physical extraction protocol. They refrained from drawing their sidearms, but they simultaneously rested their large hands near the heavy equipment latches secured to their tactical belts. That single, incredibly subtle movement communicated a devastating, unspoken promise of overwhelming violence. The security operatives stepped forward, establishing an impenetrable human barricade between my frantic family and my home. They utilized their massive, intimidating frames to herd the trespassers backward down the slope. "Move toward the street," Miller commanded, his voice cracking through the air like a heavy leather whip. The ensuing retreat proved spectacularly humiliating. Thomas desperately tried to preserve his shattered dignity, muttering empty curses under his breath, yet his expensive leather shoes scrambled rapidly backward over the crushed garden landscaping. Cynthia stumbled clumsily over her high heels, frantically clutching her husband's thick arm to maintain her balance. Preston and Valerie practically sprinted toward their leased luxury sedan, completely abandoning their flattened cardboard cartons upon my front lawn. In less than 3 agonizing minutes, my brother's entitled, aggressive home invasion was successfully reduced to a silent, cowardly withdrawal. They scrambled haphazardly into their respective vehicles, slamming the heavy doors shut. The engines roared to life, reversing frantically out of my driveway, attempting to escape the terrifying, unyielding gaze of the tactical contractors. The heavy iron gates swung closed behind the departing cars, locking together with a deeply satisfying metallic crash. The perimeter was totally secure once again. However, as I monitored their chaotic departure utilizing my digital surveillance screens, I noticed one final chilling detail. Just before my father's sedan disappeared down the tree-lined suburban street, Thomas stared directly into the main gate camera lens. His aging expression held absolutely 0 remorse. Instead, his face contorted into a dark mask of pure venomous desperation. The physical assault had failed spectacularly, but their impending bankruptcy still loomed closer than ever. By successfully denying them my equity, I had essentially signed their financial death warrant. They could no longer conquer my fortress utilizing brute force or social manipulation. Therefore, they would inevitably pivot toward the only remaining vulnerable avenue of attack. If they could not steal my physical property, they would attempt to sabotage the corporate foundation that funded my independence. The battle for my estate had concluded, but the war for my professional survival was merely beginning. The fallout from the failed driveway ambush materialized with absolute and devastating swiftness. You simply cannot attempt to quietly breach a secure executive estate, especially when the resulting trespass warnings carry the heavy weight of a corporate legal division. My family operated under the profoundly foolish assumption that our conflict remained a private domestic dispute. They failed to realize that deploying an armed protective detail automatically generates mandatory incident reports. Those detailed files bypass local municipal precincts entirely and land directly on the polished mahogany desks of my company attorneys. By Monday morning, the retaliatory counteroffensive commenced. I did not need to raise my voice or engage in petty arguments. I simply allowed my retained legal counsel to systematically dismantle my mother's carefully constructed social facade, piece by piece. The initial tactical strike targeted the Oakwood Country Club. This institution served as the primary battlefield where Cynthia launched her vicious smear campaign regarding my psychological stability. My legal team drafted a severe cease and desist mandate, demanding an immediate public retraction of every single slanderous comment my mother uttered over those cucumber sandwiches. The legal document did not merely threaten a polite civil lawsuit. It explicitly promised a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar defamation claim that would legally compel the prestigious organization to surrender their highly guarded membership rosters. We threatened to aggressively subpoena the wealthy wives of prominent local judges, wealthy hospital administrators, and commercial real estate developers. Our attorneys plan to force these elite women to testify under oath inside a public courtroom regarding the malicious gossip they so eagerly consumed. Country club boards consist primarily of risk-averse wealth managers and image-obsessed generational heirs. These affluent individuals survive by avoiding public controversy at absolutely all costs. The sudden, terrifying prospect of sitting upon a witness stand answering hostile questions about afternoon tea conversations sent a massive shockwave of panic through the regional elite community. The board of directors held an emergency closed-door meeting on Tuesday evening to address the impending legal disaster. They did not call Cynthia to offer their sympathies or hear her side of the story. Instead, the club president, a retired corporate banker, quietly visited my parents' sprawling suburban mansion. He politely but firmly requested their immediate formal resignation. He explained that their continued presence posed an unacceptable financial and public relations liability to the organization. In less than 48 hours, my mother transformed from a respected, influential socialite into a radioactive pariah. Her prestigious membership was permanently revoked, sealing her social exile. She could no longer attend the charity galas or the seasonal luncheons she desperately relied upon to validate her existence. The very same wealthy acquaintances she previously manipulated began ignoring her phone calls and crossing the street to avoid speaking with her. The social excommunication constituted merely the opening sequence of their total systemic destruction. With their desperate scheme to harvest my raw equity completely ruined, Thomas and Preston officially ran out of time. The commercial bank governing my brother's catastrophic business loans recognized the failed venture possessed zero remaining salvage value. On Thursday morning, regional regulators arrived to padlock the glass doors of Preston's leased medical technology office. They formally seized his remaining computers, repossessed his imported European sports car, and permanently froze every single associated corporate financial account. The golden child was brutally stripped of his unearned status. He was rapidly reduced to a bankrupt fraud standing empty-handed on a cold public sidewalk. Valerie, realizing her dreams of a wealthy lifestyle were entirely fabricated, packed a single designer suitcase and moved back into her own parents' basement, leaving Preston to face his ruin alone. The financial contagion then rapidly infected my parents' household. Because Thomas had aggressively leveraged his primary residence to fund his son's delusion, the lending institution demanded immediate monetary restitution. Exactly 2 weeks after the disastrous driveway ambush, a formal notice of default hit the county property registry. Foreclosure proceedings represent entirely public record within the state of Pennsylvania. Anyone with an internet connection and a casual curiosity could view the exact staggering amount of debt my father accumulated. The public nature of their financial ruin became the sole topic of conversation among our affluent Pennsylvania circles. The wealthy acquaintances Cynthia previously lied to now treated her complete collapse as front-page entertainment. The whispers spread rapidly, replacing the rumors of my mental breakdown with verifiable facts regarding their impending bank seizure. The irony proved remarkably poetic. My relatives orchestrated a ruthless, predatory campaign, hoping to force me into a cramped downtown studio apartment. They wanted to steal my sanctuary to fund their massive failures. Instead, their reckless actions evicted themselves from high society altogether. They lost their home, their reputation, and their future, all within a single devastating month. I monitored their total destruction from the quiet, serene sanctuary of my secure home office. I felt absolutely no guilt regarding their fate. True accountability operates as a rigid mathematical equation, completely devoid of sentimental attachment. Actions always carry corresponding reactions. Sometimes those consequences arrive softly through whispered apologies and reformed behavior. Sometimes they arrive violently, within a black armored vehicle carrying heavily armed federal defense contractors. My family wagered their entire existence on my expected feminine compliance, and they lost everything. Their grand generational legacy dissolved into worthless digital ash upon my computer monitor. However, cornered predators rarely accept total defeat gracefully. When an arrogant man loses his social standing, his massive home, and his familial authority, he experiences a dangerous psychological fracture. Thomas possessed far too much toxic patriarchal pride to simply pack a modest cardboard box and disappear into working-class obscurity. He required a prominent scapegoat to shoulder the heavy blame for his colossal failure. If he could not successfully extract my wealth, he resolved to completely annihilate my professional career. On a rainy Friday afternoon, my secure corporate cellular device vibrated aggressively against the surface of my desk. The caller identification displayed the private encrypted extension belonging to my company chief executive officer. This senior official rarely initiated direct phone contact unless a catastrophic international security breach occurred. I answered the connection, maintaining my calm professional composure. The executive sounded incredibly tense. He informed me that a frantic individual identifying himself as my father just contacted the Federal Military Oversight Committee in Washington. Thomas had submitted a highly detailed fabricated whistleblower report claiming I was stealing classified algorithmic defense data to sell on the foreign black market. My father decided if he was facing total public humiliation and potential fraud charges, he would drag his successful daughter into a federal espionage investigation right alongside him. The battle for my property had ended, but the fight for my freedom was just beginning. The desperate maneuver to involve federal oversight authorities proved to be the final catastrophic miscalculation in my father's completely unhinged strategy. Thomas genuinely believed that submitting a fabricated espionage report would trigger a massive government raid upon my estate, thereby destroying my career and forcing my absolute submission. He severely underestimated the rigorous analytical efficiency of military counterintelligence divisions. The Federal Committee did not dispatch armed agents to kick down my reinforced doors. Instead, they quietly reviewed my pristine digital footprints, analyzed my continuous biometric access logs, and immediately flagged his absurd claim as malicious perjury. Filing a fraudulent whistleblower report against a highly cleared defense executive constitutes a severe federal offense, carrying significant custodial penalties. By attempting to orchestrate my unjust imprisonment, my father accidentally handed my corporate attorneys the exact, irrefutable ammunition required to finalize his total destruction. My legal division moved with ruthless efficiency. They utilized the documented false police reports, the country club defamation evidence, and the newly acquired perjury charges to secure an impenetrable permanent judicial injunction. A federal judge signed a comprehensive no-contact mandate that legally prohibited every single member of my treacherous bloodline from initiating any form of communication with me forever. When the towering financial walls finally crushed their remaining defenses, the entire tone of their communication drastically altered. The aggressive hostility completely evaporated. The demanding patriarchal mandates disappeared. In their place, a pathetic, desperate begging rapidly emerged. They finally realized that brute force physical intimidation and social sabotage had failed spectacularly. They were left entirely exposed to the merciless, grinding machinery of commercial banking foreclosures. The reality of their impending homelessness stripped away their country club arrogance, revealing the terrified, incompetent cowards hiding underneath. Because standard communication channels were legally blocked, they resorted to utilizing secondary, temporary phone numbers to bypass my security filters. My restricted voicemail inbox began overflowing with frantic, intercepted audio recordings. The demanding conquerors transformed instantly into weeping victims. Cynthia left rambling, tearful messages weeping uncontrollably into her cellular device microphone. "Adelaide, please," she begged, her voice trembling with genuine, unfiltered terror. "We are going to lose the ancestral house. The bank is taking everything we own. You must help us save our legacy before we are thrown out onto the street." She completely forgot her previous attempts to paint me as a mentally unstable spinster. Suddenly, I was her only salvation. Thomas abandoned his imposing patriarchal blustering entirely. The man who previously attempted to physically intimidate heavily armed tactical contractors now sounded remarkably small and fragile. "Addie," he pleaded during a separate lengthy recording, "Valerie is incredibly stressed regarding the upcoming baby and the impending eviction. The doctors are worried about her blood pressure. You have to step up and fulfill your familial duties. We are family, and you simply cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood during a crisis." The sheer magnitude of their cognitive dissonance was truly breathtaking to witness. They spent consecutive months attempting to steal my secure sanctuary, assassinate my professional character, orchestrate a fake conservatorship, and initiate my federal incarceration. Yet, despite orchestrating a relentless campaign of psychological and physical warfare, they genuinely maintained the delusional belief that they were somehow entitled to my financial rescue. They honestly thought they could burn my entire life to the ground and then ask me to hand them a bucket of water to extinguish their own self-inflicted flames. The most astounding display of unearned arrogance arrived on a Thursday evening via a blocked text message from my brother. Preston somehow bypassed the initial carrier filter, utilizing an untraceable prepaid mobile device. His digital message contained absolutely zero apologies for his catastrophic failures. It exhibited no remorse for his aggressive driveway ambush. The text read exactly as follows: "I forgive you for overreacting to the moving day situation. Just wire the necessary funds to my new checking account, and we can put this entire messy misunderstanding completely behind us." I stared at the glowing screen of my secure cellular device, marveling at his towering psychological blindness. He was offering his unsolicited forgiveness for my survival. He generously offered to pardon me for refusing to let him steal my life savings. It was the absolute pinnacle of narcissistic entitlement condensed into 2 brief sentences. I did not reply to his absurd message. I applied the final, most devastating boundary imaginable against their toxic incursions. I deployed absolute, impenetrable silence. I refused to argue against their twisted, manipulative logic. I did not call them back to gloat about their spectacular public downfall. I refrained from sending them color-coded accounting spreadsheets detailing the exact mathematical magnitude of their massive financial failures. Engaging in any form of dialogue, even to deliver a well-deserved insult, provides a toxic abuser with the emotional supply they desperately crave. A response indicates that their actions still impact your psychological state. Silence, on the other hand, starves them of all power. I simply forwarded every single intercepted voicemail transcript and incoming text message directly to my corporate legal team. I instructed my attorneys to aggressively enforce the judicial no-contact mandate without any hesitation. The lawyers immediately filed breach of injunction notices, escalating the legal perils surrounding my desperate relatives. My family had spent 3 decades constructing a fragile, towering house of cards, relying entirely upon the foundational assumption that my feminine compliance would always catch them whenever they fell. They assumed my desire for parental approval would inevitably override my logical boundaries. They built their entire fraudulent empire on the premise that they could perpetually extract my resources to subsidize their incompetence. I did not push their fragile structure over. I merely stepped completely out of the way and allowed the natural, unbiased forces of financial gravity to execute their inevitable job. Sitting in my serene, temperature-controlled workspace, I realized I had finally learned the hardest lesson a person can possibly absorb regarding toxic lineage. Sometimes the absolute only successful method for winning a devastating war against your own relatives involves completely refusing to fight upon their chosen battlefield. You win by removing your participation from their chaotic theatrical production. The profound silence remained absolute for 3 uninterrupted weeks. The regional commercial bank successfully executed the foreclosure proceedings, permanently stripping Thomas and Cynthia of their prestigious suburban address. Preston and Valerie were forced to quietly relocate into a cramped rental property situated in a highly undesirable industrial neighborhood far removed from their beloved country club elite. I assumed the exhausting conflict had reached a permanent, peaceful conclusion. My secure perimeter remained unbreached, and my professional career continued flourishing. However, tranquility is often a deceptive illusion. A heavy certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered via a bonded corporate courier rather than standard municipal mail. The thick envelope did not originate from my defeated family. It displayed the imposing silver crest of a massive international banking conglomerate based out of New York. I sliced the heavy parchment open utilizing a steel letter opener, discovering a staggering legal notification that immediately chilled the blood in my veins. Before his medical technology startup completely collapsed, Preston had engaged in one final act of desperate criminality. Knowing his own credit rating was entirely ruined, he had secretly forged my digital signature on a massive secondary commercial loan application. He utilized my pristine financial history and my executive status as a fraudulent guarantor to secure emergency operational capital. The international financial institution, having exhausted all collection efforts against my bankrupt brother, was now formally holding me legally responsible for $2 million of unsecured corporate debt. My family lacked the physical strength to breach my biometric locks, but my brother had successfully bypassed my perimeter using a forged signature, effectively chaining a massive financial anchor around my neck. The massive international banking conglomerate that delivered that terrifying certified letter severely underestimated their chosen target. They expected to bully a terrified, compliant victim into assuming the catastrophic $2 million debt my brother fraudulently created. Instead, they collided headfirst with a highly fortified corporate defense executive backed by a merciless legal division. Proving the commercial loan signature was completely forged required exactly 3 hours of coordinated effort from my attorneys. Because I operate within highly classified federal procurement sectors, my daily physical location is meticulously documented. My biometric access logs, secure facility entry timestamps, and heavily encrypted digital footprint easily demonstrated that I was actively conducting a restricted naval simulation miles away at the exact moment those fraudulent lending documents were supposedly executed. The irrefutable empirical data immediately destroyed their civil claim. The financial institution officially retracted their demand against my estate, realizing they possessed zero legal standing to seize my assets. My brother, however, did not escape the brutal consequences of his desperate criminality. Forging a signature to secure massive commercial funding constitutes severe federal wire fraud. The banking conglomerate immediately forwarded the forged application packet to government prosecutors. The authorities intervened with ruthless efficiency. Preston ultimately traded his imaginary wealthy lifestyle and his fake medical startup for a very real looming federal indictment. His final attempt to chain a financial anchor around my neck only succeeded in dragging himself straight to the bottom of the ocean. It has now been exactly 6 months since my private tactical security team escorted my treacherous relatives off my pristine property. I am currently sitting inside my quiet, temperature-controlled home office. I am looking out through the reinforced glass window panes, gazing toward the expensive, manicured gardens they so desperately attempted to steal on that crisp autumn morning. The harsh winter frost has finally melted, giving way to a vibrant, colorful spring bloom across the Pennsylvania landscape. My sovereign sanctuary remains entirely secure, unburdened by the toxic, chaotic presence of entitled invaders. The heavy bronze Liberty Bell replica still sits prominently upon the polished corner of my mahogany desk. I place the old, jagged brass key cylinder right beside it on the very day I upgraded my perimeter locks. Looking at those specific items every single morning serves as a powerful, silent reminder. True sovereign independence is rarely ever granted voluntarily by those individuals who benefit from your continued subjugation. Independence is not a gift you passively receive from an oppressive patriarchal hierarchy. Independence must be fiercely declared and aggressively protected against all hostile incursions, regardless of any shared genetic history. I do not know exactly where Preston and Valerie are currently residing. I do not monitor public judicial records anymore, and I refuse to check social media platforms to observe their inevitable downward spiral. The impending criminal fraud trial likely drained whatever minuscule resources they managed to salvage from the pathetic wreckage of his dissolved medical technology company. I heard through the remaining quiet whispers of their country club exile that my parents were forced to downsize drastically. Thomas and Cynthia permanently abandoned their sprawling ancestral mansion when the commercial foreclosure became absolute. They relocated to a tiny, cramped rental property located 2 towns away from their previous elite neighborhood. The sheer poetic justice of their current living situation remains undeniable. The very same arrogant people who confidently demanded I surrender my sprawling estate to accommodate a fake nursery are now living the exact marginalized reality they tried to force upon my shoulders. They intended to banish me to a cheap downtown studio apartment so they could maintain their luxurious illusion. Through their own relentless greed, they successfully evicted themselves from high society forever. Society will constantly tell you that family means absolutely everything. Traditional culture loudly insists that blood remains thicker than water, demanding infinite grace and continuous forgiveness for toxic relatives. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that we owe our parents and siblings an unpayable debt of unconditional loyalty. However, true, family does not constantly measure your inherent worth by calculating exactly what financial equity they can forcefully extract from your bank accounts. Genuine loved ones do not orchestrate stealth home invasions. They do not arrive at your private driveway armed with flattened cardboard moving boxes and heavy-duty shipping tape, intending to pack up your entire existence against your will. When I reached under this heavy wooden desk and pressed that biometric security button summoning armed contractors to clear my property, I did not lose a loving family. I successfully neutralized a dangerous parasitic threat. I excised a malignant tumor that had been quietly draining my emotional and financial energy for 36 years. I stopped viewing myself as a disobedient daughter, failing to please an unpleasable patriarch. I finally recognized myself as a successful, autonomous woman defending her rightful territory. The silence that followed their forced departure brought profound healing. I no longer spend my weekends attending suffocating dinner parties, absorbing passive-aggressive insults regarding my single relationship status. I no longer waste precious mental bandwidth attempting to navigate the exhausting labyrinth of my mother's weaponized maternal guilt. My professional career continues to accelerate rapidly, precisely because I am no longer dragging the heavy anchor of their fabricated familial obligations. The energy I previously wasted trying to earn their impossible respect is now entirely invested in building my own extraordinary future. If you are listening to this narrative today, and you are the specific individual who is always expected to quietly yield to unreasonable demands, let me deliver a crucial, unyielding truth. Your hard-earned success belongs entirely to you. You did not endure the late nights, the brutal negotiations, and the overwhelming stress just to hand your rewards over to relatives who refuse to build their own stability. Stop negotiating with people who do not possess a conscience. Stop attempting to reason with individuals who view your achievements as their personal inheritance. Build your impenetrable fortress. Upgrade your perimeter security. Change your physical and emotional locks permanently. You must completely sever the invisible strings of toxic guilt that keep you tied to their sinking ships. Step away from the chaos and let gravity handle the rest. Absolutely never apologize for fiercely protecting your internal peace and your external sanctuary. I would love to know if you have ever been forced to enforce an impossible boundary against manipulative, toxic relatives. I invite you to share if you have ever had to walk away from the very people who were supposed to protect you. Drop your personal story down in the comments section below. I want to hear exactly how you successfully reclaimed your own sovereign territory. Subscribe to the channel for more content, and I will see you next time. When the dust finally settles on a shattered family legacy, the silence left behind is both profound and terrifying. It is in this exact quiet space, long after the hired moving boxes are abandoned on the lawn and the formal eviction notices are permanently served, that the true, unbearable weight of our cultural failures becomes visible. Looking back at the harrowing journey of a daughter who was forced to summon armed tactical guards to protect her physical home from her own parents and brother, we are compelled to look into the unforgiving mirror of American family life. This is not merely a tale of a residential real estate dispute or a corporate executive aggressively defending her financial assets. It is a deeply agonizing, emotionally rich reflection on how modern parenting, when stripped of its core foundational virtues, can mutate into a destructive parasitic force that ruins the very children it seeks to successfully protect. In the absolute heart of traditional American culture, The family home is meant to be a sovereign sanctuary of moral instruction, a sacred place where the vital principles of honesty, fairness, and accountability are meticulously passed down from one generation to the next. True family responsibility is never about aggressively shielding a child from the natural, painful consequences of their own reckless actions. Yet, as we saw with Thomas and Cynthia, a dangerous cultural shift has slowly poisoned our society. We have tragically confused perpetual enabling with unconditional loving. By deliberately creating a golden child in Preston, a son who was systematically handed every financial advantage, excused from every moral failure, and heavily funded by the emotional exhaustion of his sister, his parents did not set him up for a successful life. They carefully constructed his financial and spiritual guillotine. They actively taught him that blind entitlement is an acceptable substitute for genuine effort, and that emotional manipulation can easily replace actual competence. To American parents raising children today, the message derived from this collapse is urgently clear. You cannot unconditionally fund a child's delusions and ever expect them to develop functional character. If you do not intentionally allow your children to experience the painful, unyielding gravity of their own mistakes in their youth, society will eventually deliver those consequences with ruthless, catastrophic force in their adulthood. True traditional parenting requires the immense emotional courage to say no to, demand strict fairness and equity among all siblings, and to prioritize rigorous, uncomfortable honesty over the desperate preservation of a fragile, inflated ego. When parents value social optics and country club status over the emotional awareness required to truly see the harm they are causing, they guarantee the eventual destruction of their own lineage. This tragic familial dynamic also serves as a critical life-saving blueprint for young adults attempting to navigate the suffocating expectations of toxic lineage. The main character in this harrowing saga imparts a radical, intensely liberating truth to all young people. Your biological ties do not legally or morally obligate you to serve as a perpetual sacrificial lamb for your family's willful incompetence. Modern society frequently weaponizes the archaic phrase, "blood is thicker than water," to aggressively force competent, successful individuals into shrinking their own lives so that toxic relatives might feel large. But true adulthood and genuine emotional awareness begin the exact moment you realize that respect must be entirely mutual, and familial love cannot be mathematically measured by what can be financially extracted from your bank accounts. Young people must explicitly understand that building a highly secure fortress, both financially and emotionally, is never an act of selfish rebellion. It is the ultimate necessary expression of adult self-respect. You are completely allowed to change the locks on your doors. You are explicitly allowed to walk away from a burning building, even if the people who intentionally set the fire are the exact ones who gave you life. If we elevate our perspective and view this severe societal fracture strictly through the clear lens of a spiritual practitioner, the complete collapse of this family reflects a much deeper, more insidious spiritual sickness currently plaguing modern American society. We are actively witnessing a historical era completely devoid of genuine self-cultivation. True spiritual discipline requires bravely looking inward, developing a rigorous internal moral compass that highly values quiet wisdom and personal morality far above external social validation and relentless material acquisition. Preston's tragic descent into federal wire fraud and his parents' desperate clawing grasp for their fading country club status are merely the inevitable, predictable symptoms of lost souls that have foolishly tethered their entire personal identity to the shallow, rapidly shifting sands of public perception. They completely lack the required internal spiritual resilience to face their own dark shadows. A dedicated practitioner of spiritual wisdom clearly observes that when individuals stubbornly fail to cultivate their inner morality, they inevitably begin to desperately consume the living energy of those around them. They mutate into emotional and financial vampires entirely incapable of generating their own internal light, so they relentlessly seek to steal it from those who naturally shine brightly. The urgent spiritual message to all American parents is one of immediate radical course correction. Guide your children not just toward prestigious Ivy League degrees or lucrative medical technology startups, but direct them toward the quiet, unseen, grueling work of self-mastery. Teach your children that true, unassailable wealth is an unshakable inner peace forged permanently through highly ethical living, radical personal accountability, and the spiritual resilience to slowly rebuild after a legitimate, honest failure. When we raise children completely without a solid moral center, without the vital spiritual stamina to humbly accept when they are wrong, we recklessly release dangerous empty vessels into the world. Continuous cultivation of the human soul is absolutely not a luxury. It is the ultimate required survival tool in an incredibly unpredictable, unforgiving societal landscape. These are the remarkably hard, deeply uncomfortable truths we must collectively face if we are to successfully heal our deep generational wounds and forge new family legacies permanently built on authentic strength rather than fragile, wealthy illusions. I personally invite you to join me on this continuous, revealing journey of untangling the highly complex webs of modern family dynamics, overwhelming societal expectations, and radical personal empowerment. If this message resonated with your spirit, if you have ever had to build an impenetrable fortress to protect your own peace from those who share your DNA, please subscribe and follow Sophia Vengeance. Together, we will boldly continue to explore the unapologetic, necessary realities of taking back our lives from those who desperately seek to diminish our light. As we sit in the absolute quiet aftermath, deeply contemplating the smoldering ruins of a wealthy family that thoroughly destroyed itself in the blind pursuit of unearned power, we are left with a lingering, intensely uncomfortable realization. We are heavily conditioned by traditional culture to falsely believe that the highest, most noble form of familial love is unyielding daily support, endless financial sacrifice, and a warm, forgiving hand constantly reaching into the darkness to forcibly pull our loved ones back to the light. But perhaps this is the grandest, most lethal societal illusion of all. Perhaps the most profound, agonizing, and ultimately pure expression of true love is not active intervention, but intentional, absolute, unforgiving silence. Sometimes the only possible way to truly honor the spiritual journey of those who stubbornly refuse to grow is to step away entirely and allow them to completely shatter against the cold pavement of their own making. True spiritual liberation doesn't come from successfully saving your family. It comes from the terrifying realization that they were always destined to destroy themselves, and your only divine duty was to refuse to let them take you down with them.